civic space, who else are you looking at to support the work that you do? So we'll start with Chester, Sisanda, George, Katleho, and then Mino, and then Roberto. I think we should start if the people, even if the people, but we are waiting for the translator, right? Is the translator here?
Not yet. I'm just quickly working on it, but yeah, I think we can just begin.
Which language is this? Is this Portuguese?
Yes, it's Portuguese.
I'm looking at the list of attendees. I don't see any Portuguese speaking people yet. So maybe we should start. We only have 3 attendees, but I think we should start because this is a recorded session, right? So that should be fine.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, fantastic. Please mute and please, yeah, take us there. I don't know. Are we in the waiting room? Oh, yeah, it looks like we are live. We're not in the waiting room. Is it true? Can the attendees hear us?
Yes, we are live. So we are no longer in the waiting room, so we can begin. And then can you also just connect it to our Facebook page?
Okay, Martha has confirmed that we are audible, so this has started. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Today is an opportunity for us to have a conversation hosted by the Southern Africa Human Rights Defenders Network. My name is Sibongile Ndashe. I am the Executive Director of the Initiative for Strategic Litigation in Africa. The closure of civic space. One of our colleagues says that we should stop talking about closing because it's not like it's closing itself, the civic space that we are talking about, but there are people who are closing it. So we talk about the closure, you know, of civil space to recognize that there are people who of civic space, that there are people who are doing that. What we do know that there are threats, there are attacks increasingly to the work that we do. And there are very specific attacks to the work that LGBTIQ activists are doing in the sub-region. This morning or afternoon's discussion is intended to help us understand the nature of the attacks. So we want to understand who is attacking, what kind of attacks, what's the resistance, what's the pushback, and who is fighting with the activists in the countries. I do think that as we talk about these very specific attacks, we must recognize that this is a broader fight. This is a fight against democracy. This is a fight against rights. And we should also think about what it means to organize in silos when the people who are attacking the anti-rights actors aren't as polarized as our interventions have been. So even though today's conversation is about the attacks that are specific to LGBTIQ work, sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression work in the sub-region, I am inviting all of us to think about making connections with the other attacks that are happening. But even that, as that happens, it is important to look at the attacks that face various sectors so that when we come together to build this broad-based alliance to respond, we have a very clear sense of what the attacks look like so that when we build resistance or pushback strategies, we are not just developing strategies that are acontextual or that fail to meet the needs of the various sectors that are defended, that are attacked. So as we continue this conversation, I would like to introduce the panelists that are going to help us have these conversations from the various countries in the sub-region. I will introduce people before they start the conversation. The first speaker is going to be Chester Samba. from Gays and Lesbians of Zimbabwe, followed by Sisanda Mavimbela, Executive Director of Eswatini Sexual and Gender Minorities, who will be followed by George Kachimanga, the Program and Operations Manager, Nyasa Rainbow Alliance in Malawi, who will then be followed by Katleho Kulanyane Kisupile, Cultural Architect and Development Practitioner from Botswana, who will then be followed by Mino Likwasi, Women's Alliance for Equality, Women's Alliance for Equality Wafe from Zambia. So we are very well represented. I'm just seeking to confirm if we have been joined by a panelist from Mozambique, but I don't think the person has arrived. So we can start. Chester, Girls has been doing this work for a very, 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 very long time. I think the attacks may have changed over the years, but we know about the confiscation of publications, from way back then, in the 90s. But as the years go by, the people who are doing the attacks aren't only state actors. We are increasingly seeing the role of other private actors, not only from the country, but who are assisted by others. So can you tell us what is the situation now and what has changed from the attacks that the LGBTQI community is facing in Zimbabwe?
Thank you, Smongile. Like you rightly say, Girls has been in existence for so long, and I think we've been part of the attacks as the Girls formed in 1990. And I think as we were operating, at some point, we were the sole organization representing the interests of the LGBTI community. And in that, I think it also posed a lot of challenges being an LGBTI group, sort of fronting an agenda that's not increasing, that's not very popular in country at the time. So we faced some kind of threats, we faced some resistance in terms of the work and the community that we were representing. And I think this stemmed from the issue itself being viewed by broader society and broader civil society actors as being one that doesn't fit the ideology of the broader movement or the government. And also from a moralistic point of view, we were also being viewed as being immoral and championing the rights of immoral or un-African practices. And in that, I think we faced quite some challenges in terms of threats of arrest, harassments, raids, and restrictions basically on the part of our work. But I think with the advocacy that we were doing as an association, we got to a point where we were beginning to get some notice or recognition from civil society in general, as well as government, in terms of the work that we were doing. And so when I look at closure of the civic space, I wouldn't want then to say generally civil society space is closing, but I think a certain section of civil society organizations is being affected by the work that they do, and also how government is responding to that work that they're doing. Whilst you find also there's a certain section of civil society that's actually thriving and having access, and I think being able to work comfortably in this current environment. So there are quite a number of challenges. In country, we see currently there are legal restrictions to the work of civil society, just in general. We see that there's been the introduction of a PVO bill trying to regulate the work of civil society broadly. But when it comes then to LGBTI groups, we seem to be in a different time zone at the moment. Our space, we cannot say is closing up, but when you look historically, being the sole organization, we now boast of 12 organizations working in country, doing work around serving LGBTI communities. And I think for me, that's something that's very encouraging. We also see there are issues around resources. There are increased resources being channeled towards the work of LGBTI groups. And I think for me, that's something that we should also be proud of. And in terms of the advocacy work, we see ourselves in certain spaces and being able to speak and be visible. So there is a semblance of us being able to hold on the space that we currently occupy and continue to do that. But that's not the same when you look at broader civil society, where some are really facing challenges, harassments, arrests, kidnappings, and the like. So when I look at the work of LGBTI groups, like I said earlier, they are very, or they are deemed or perceived to be unpopular in terms of the work that we do. So this then affects our ability to access the political arena itself, providing information or consulting with government and being able to work closely with government. That's an area that we feel we start encountering bottlenecks when we try and do that. Then when you also try and see access to resources, and basically I'm talking about resources coming from the state and not the foreign funding that we receive. But when you try and also access local resources coming from the state, we haven't been at a point where we are able to enjoy that access. Then when I also look at access to advocacy space, this is also still very much contested, looking at our ability to associate freely, our ability to speak and occupy space where we can share information and protest. This is still very guarded when I look at how also LGBTI communities face challenges when they try and access public media, when they try and access public spaces, as well as radio and TV. This is an area where we still feel there's still a lot that needs to be done as we continue to be shut out of those spaces because of the work that we do or the communities that we represent. So generally, when you look at the state of the movement in Zimbabwe, the LGBTI movement, we are thriving at the moment. We are in a space where we are enjoying the plurality of voices and organizing that's happening, and us being able to come together on issues that affect the community and organizing and speaking to that. I think we are enjoying that space currently. Then when you look at the allies, increasingly we are seeing a lot of allies coming through, also supporting the work that we do, mainly on the health and HIV/AIDS front. There's been a lot of traction around that. But when you try and then look at the issue of human rights, equality, and justice, you still find contestations in there. You still find organizations trying still to push back on inclusion. They would rather LGBTI groups are excluded from those spaces. Yet we are also saying that these are critical spaces that we need to be occupying and being able to contribute to in terms of the work that we do as organizations. So in a nutshell, I think I'll stop there in terms of what we're experiencing as LGBTI groups in Zimbabwe. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. You said a lot, but I think in the analysis, one of the things that kind of stick out for me is we are thriving, we are enjoying, the plurality of voices and the other developments, the growth of the movement, moving from being the sole and then now having kind of 12. And also the distinction between the challenges faced by the sector and other sectors. We are going to come back to some of these things, but it is very interesting that this is not the kind of narrative that one often hears, that a representative of LGBTIQ organization comes to a platform like this and then say we are thriving, in the current context. So thank you very much for sharing that. Sisanda Mavimbela from Eswatini. Kuhamba njani?
Hi, Sibongile, thank you so much. Let me have my video on. So I was kicked out a bit when you were asking the questions, but I think I got the gist of it. So currently in Swaziland with the human rights defenders, we are as LGBTI human rights defenders, we are moving forward in terms of work being done and the space of the human rights defenders themselves. We have currently, just to put you in context, we have currently created a consortium of the LGBTI organizations, or the 7 LGBTI organizations in the country, and that's one space that we think will help us, even as human rights defenders, where we can be able to create a structure where we know what to do and how to protect the human rights defenders in the country. Otherwise, it's been a very hostile environment for any human rights defender in the country. As you know, we are currently speaking to the civil unrest caused by the mass democratic movement. So this does create, obviously, we know that the space for LGBTI activists and human rights defenders to work is very limited within the space, because you kind of then realize that people think there's a priority of defenders, of human rights defenders, that can speak at this moment, because there's human rights that can wait, of course. So you find that we are having contestations from even the political, some, not all, of course, but even the political parties that are in the mass democratic movement are contesting the organizations working with LGBTI, especially Eswatini sexual and gender minorities, the one I work for, because that specifically speaks to legal and policy reform. So you find that we do have backlash, especially on social media, where they speak of these human rights defenders can wait, there's frontline kind of, they believe there's frontline human rights defenders. And so, but we do have allies. You find that mostly the women organizations and half of the political parties truly stand for LGBTI human rights defenders in the country. So I think just polish me up on the questions and what I missed there, Sibongile.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So you have captured most of the problem, but I just want to probe. You have answered most of the questions, but I just want to probe a bit, because we really had threefold. We wanted to understand the state of the movement, the kind of attacks that the movement is facing, and who the allies are. And I understand that, and this happens a lot, that when there are other rights, at stake, the community, society. So here it's really a crisis of democracy, right? Whether the monarchy continues to enjoy the powers that it has. And then many people feel that all other struggles, whether it's women's rights or LGBTQI, they are just surplus to requirement, because as a nation, this is really what everyone should be coming together to fight for. And in some ways, issues like LGBTQI are seen as distractions or a source of polarization, of the movement, a mass democratic movement that people are trying to build. What other challenges do you face other than this one? Who else is attacking the work that you do?
So yes, it's the culturalists and the religious leaders, right? So I think one way of tackling that would be for us to look at how we speak to culture being something that the human rights defenders, because it seems as if human rights defenders are here to remove culture, especially from Swaziland. We know we're a very cultural country. So if we can try to speak to, as human rights defenders, to how LGBTI rights aren't here to remove anything from culture. Instead, we actually want to embrace culture and try to unite that. That keeping culture does not mean actually ignoring specific human rights, just based on the fact that we want to be cultural or religious. I think those are the attacks that we are having. And, some society, and like I said, it's mostly virtual, because we don't have any, we do actually violations, obviously, of of individuals like myself as a human rights defender, as an individual being attacked on social media, or it hasn't been anything physical yet, but that's what I can speak to. So
okay, fantastic. And I think that when we come to the end and think about what's possible, what we can build on, this argument on the right to culture, one of my favorite provisions of the Maputo Protocol is a provision that is really new and very specific to us in Africa. It's the right to a positive cultural context. And I do believe that there is an opportunity to really begin to build and give content, to this right that is really not found in a lot of other treaties. Like, what does it mean to live in a positive cultural context? And I think this is one of the strongest kind of tools for pushing back by really beginning to develop that provision of the protocol. Now, I am going to move on to George Katimanga from Malawi Nyasa Rainbow Alliance. George, if you can just answer those questions for us.
Thank you for having me. I'm sorry I won't be able to put the video because I'm in transit.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, I come from an organization called Nyasa Rainbow Alliance. It's an LGBT-led organization that was established way back in 2014. And of course, there were other movements that were doing human rights work by that time in Malawi. But we saw some gap in terms of, there was an implementation gap, especially on HIV programming and other human rights issues. So that's why committee members came together and then they decided to form an organization that is called Nyasa Rainbow Alliance. So one of the issues that we faced that time was in terms of registration. Malawi is a country that criminalizes consensual same-sex relationships, and it is actually legal. You might be arrested simply by if people try to identify that you are LGBTI without necessarily getting you into the act. So the government by then denied our registration, saying that the membership practices were considered illegal. So what we did by then was just to seek a judicial review, and we still have that case in court. So the political environment is not that welcoming for human rights defenders, in particular those dealing with LGBT issues in the country. And along the way, we really have experienced a lot of challenges in terms of there have been issues of domestic violence. Like, for example, just like 2 months ago, we had an activist who was he was attacked, let's say, in his community for promoting human rights work. It was so severe that they even had to, let's say, pour some porridge into his body, and then he got those wounds, which is a very, very bad context in our country. And then the police also are not doing much about it. We still experience, let's say, a lot of political violence in the country. Just to add on that, we also have issues of online smear campaigns. I think it was also already mentioned, which is common among countries in Southern Africa. So there are a lot of issues that we are facing, and there are a lot of needs that needs to be addressed in as far as human rights work is concerned in the country. But still, we have tried to have an interface with the government, but it doesn't work out most of the times. So the only means that we can use to advocate is maybe through international mechanisms, where, for example, we can get advantage of the universal periodic review to have that kind of push to the government to actually maybe try to accept or some of the recommendations that are made to it by other states when they are meeting. So in terms of the allies, yes, we do have organizations that support our work, and we are more happy that even the Malai Human Rights Commission in the country is more than willing to work with the community, in advancing the human rights work. For example, previously we had what we call, there was a recommendation that was made to the government, for example, to decriminalize, but then the government decided to subject the issue to a referendum that people should decide, because it says that Malawi is more like a Christian nation, but Malawi is not a Christian nation. We are governed by the constitution anyway. So when that was done, the Malawi Human Rights Commission said, no, we can't do a national study on issues that affect the minority. In the end, they kind of changed the approach to do it a bit differently. So as a movement, we are very delighted that we have that kind of strong area in the country. Besides that, we also have, let's say, the National AIDS Commission, which is also doing good work together with the human rights defenders in the country and the organizations in trying to improve that sexual reproductive health rights are actually observed. Because we did experience a lot of stigma and discrimination in as far as access to health services are concerned, and having an area like that has also helped us a lot to improve the health sector as well in the country. So in a nutshell, that's all I can say, unless there are other specific questions that I can respond to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that, George. In previous governments, and I think this is something that's coming up because Chester also raised it, and maybe at some point we'll be able to talk about it, this insider, outsider, so in relation to government, because right now it looks like it's no longer possible to do this work, and that's why you are looking at engaging the international mechanisms. But I do remember that there was a time when it was possible for activists to actually engage, with government. I remember people going to Malawi, and the then president, I think it was Joyce Banda, saying that when we had the moratorium, right, on prosecution of offenses around kind of same-sex sex, and then what happened? When did that relationship kind of go away, where there is now like no access to the government? Was it the change of government, or has it been happening gradually?
We have experienced several changes in terms of the government. By that time, yes, it was during the time of Joyce Banda. Things were quite good, at least. Then we had another government which was headed by we said Peter Mutharika. So that's the previous government. They kind of, I think they accepted two recommendations that were made to them. And then it was even a bit flexible in terms of having an interface with them. With the current government, we are facing a president who has been a pastor the whole life, and then a pastor in Malawi, which is culturally rooted, and also people don't have that kind of positive attitude towards LGBT issues. So it's very, very difficult. The current government hasn't been clear on its stand as to how it is going to handle the LGBT issues or its actual view, because it's just trying to play games, maybe because obviously it's out of fear of losing votes and so on and so forth, despite the fact that we have a pastor as a president, which is also a very big hindrance to our work. Yeah.
Thank you so much, George. Katleho, over to you. What's happening in Botswana?
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me with you today. I hope I am clear to you.
Yes,
you may see people moving behind me. I just finished, I'm in a conference, so I'm balancing, much as we do our entire lives. I want to talk to what's something that Chester said in terms of how Botswana, we've now gotten this sense of cognitive dissonance, because the civil society space and the advocacy space here, we aren't facing that direct action violence and direct action, I guess, the harm we face is more at the bureaucratic level than it is at the on the ground level. So for example, in 2017, the High Court, no, the Court of Appeal in Botswana allowed trans persons, two trans people, to change their gender markers. And so we expected that now that the courts had already said this is what needs to be done, or this can happen, there would be state action, which we were told in the ruling of one of the cases, that the state was going to start changing systems to ensure that trans folks could then easily go and get their gender markers changed. However, it hasn't happened, and now we're 5 years down the line, right? And so when you try and do any advocacy in that regard, you are still told, no, we're working on it, we're working on it, we're working on it. And with the breadth of the kinds of human rights defenses that we're working on right now, or we're looking at being happening across the country, as much as LGBTQ plus folks have a bit more of a solidified or a semblance of a unified movement, we are still ensuring that we connect with other movements to ensure that the progressions that we make aren't then only for us, because we are counted in so many other spaces. So when we look at what is happening, particularly to human rights defenders in the country, it's an insidious, very silent form of gatekeeping. It is bureaucratic. It isn't yet at the point, and I hope, I mean, Sisanda said it, you know, we face violence, but most of it hasn't become physical as human rights defenders. But we know for a fact that to some folks will, one of the things we said earlier today was that, you know, your advocacy work becomes the thing that is used to stunt your progress, no matter where you are. And right now we are still seeing this sense of people end up in the human rights defense network or NGO section because the mainstream refuses to acknowledge or accept the fact that LGBTQ plus people exist and LGBTQ plus people deserve to occupy spaces. So I guess without going on anymore, our violence is, it's like a sleeping gas. It's there, but you will only find out that it's in the air once you've inhaled it.
Okay. Thank you, Katlego. Who are the allies, you know, of the movement? I mean, I think Botswana sits in a very kind of different space from other people, you know, so you've already developed case law on gender markers. There was a successful constitutional court decision, you know, to decriminalize same-sex sex. And so for many people outside, it looks like an upward, you know, trajectory. So I'd like to know who your allies are, and also want to know whether this is a contradiction, you know, that legally or from the courtrooms, it looks like, yeah, all systems go, and what happens in society.
On the case of allyship, we are, again, over the years, have been trying to build a network of allies. There's a small selection of faith-based leaders or faith institution leaders who have been open to firstly getting their own knowledge from within the LGBTQ plus advocacy space, but also making it available or opening access to their congregants and to their communities of faith within Botswana. However, and one of our greatest allies by way of their practice has been the courts, which has been the reminder that in as much as the state might not want to do any work, the courts themselves will put the work in. The issue is, this is again where the contradiction comes in. All of these cases that we can celebrate, all of these court-won progressive steps that have been made are countered by the inefficiency of the state, who is tasked then with ensuring that it isn't just a case, it becomes reality. We haven't seen the decriminalization of consensual same-sex sexual activity, great. However, it's now just a series of let's meet with people. So the president, the office of the president met with one of the most prominent organizations within the country, Le Habibo, which is the Lesbian, Gays and Bisexuals of Botswana. And that was a broadcast meeting. And he said, I vow to ensure that there will be dedicated action done to ensure that LGBTQ plus people can have dignified life in Botswana. What that action is, didn't state it. Whose responsibility it is to do anything, didn't state it. So we're still going back and checking, hi, sorry, is this your mandate or is it somebody else's mandate? The police forces right now, again, we still are getting instances of mistreatment of LGBTQ plus people. However, the police forces themselves are open to talking to us. So it's that talk shop mentality of we can sit in here and then say, oh, that was very interesting for us to hear. We hope to learn, but then the implementation of what we've taught is still lagging. And that's the frustrating part of this.
Okay, thank you very much for that input, Katlego. We are going to Zambia. Mino Likwasi, please tell us what's happening in Zambia.
Hi, everyone. So sorry for joining in so late. Technology just didn't cooperate today. And I apologize if my voice is a little bit off. I'm just trying to fight with a bad cold right now. But I think a lot of the things that my colleagues have said apply to Zambia as well. But I would highlight perhaps, I think the role that highlight. I'm sorry, someone speaking?
I'm going to ask everyone, I think someone had their mic on. Please proceed, please proceed.
Okay, sure. I really just wanted to highlight, I think, the negative media reporting. So over the last few years, this is something that we've seen over time. It will come and go, and usually it kind of just goes away after a few days. People have the next hot topic to talk about, and then it will come up again. But I think from Ida Hobbit, which was in May, a couple of embassies flew the rainbow flag in solidarity, and they had solidarity messages across the social media platforms. So this brought a lot of conversation online from different personalities, and it actually almost felt so coordinated, which was something that hadn't happened before, because it would be some small blog page that picks up a story and runs with it, and people would talk about it for a day or two and it dies down. But this was happening, I think, systematically for like a week or two, and it felt very coordinated, which raises the question, are we underestimating the level of coordination that the anti-LGBTI movement is having? Because what happened most recently was not random. It didn't feel random. It felt like there was someone behind it actively pushing it. The messaging in all these posts was pretty similar. And all of it was really just pushing the state and the government to make their position known on the like what is your view on LGBTI or gay rights, as they like to call them. And eventually the president did make this statement reiterating that his government does not promote gay or lesbian rights. And what we saw after that was a lot of comments on social media of people saying, oh, since the government doesn't support it, then I guess we can now beat this person, or we can now do certain things to these people, which I think is a very irresponsible thing to do. And that's part of the advocacy conversation we're trying to have, is that it's not acceptable for the head of state to incite violence in that manner, irrespective of who it's targeted at. Because you're looking at marginalized populations, and such statements are only pushing our communities further from the margins. So that's one thing. But it's also, I think, our context right now is a lot of awareness around post-COVID economic vulnerability. Besides the hate speech, the usual fights that we have with law enforcement. But I think the economic vulnerability was something that became very apparent during COVID and after COVID. So I think now it's raising the question and making us think more around our sustainability as organizations, but also at individual level. How are we taking care of activists that are doing this work? We know that this is a lot of heavy work. We know that it takes a toll. So who's taking care of the activists, and what does our post-activist life look like? Which is a conversation that we haven't necessarily had in a lot of spaces. So I think for now, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so Mina, my follow-up is, who are the allies? And other than this very specific attack that comes from or that happened around Idaho because the foreign embassies hoisted LGBT flags, are there other actors, so or other instances where you are seeing this kind of coordinated, attacks? And is there a sense of who is behind, this very tech savvy, social media posts, and all of that are really able to get people to push the president to make the statement?
I think we don't know the who, which is something that we're trying to explore, because so it came from a wide range of different actors, right? And it would be so today it would be some doctor talking about it and making it a mental health issue, saying it's a mental health or a mental illness, and that people just need to be treated. And then referencing certain activities that had happened or meetings, and then at the end of it, calling for government to state its position. And the next day, it would be the leader of one of the biggest churches in the country making a statement. So his angle would be talking about how LGBTI communities are going against the family or the family structure, and then referencing those same meetings that the other one spoke about and calling for government to make its position known. And then on the third day, it was yet another reverend making this statement, talking about how God is punishing us for allowing LGBTI people to exist, and that's why we have COVID, that's why we have monkeypox, and then referencing the same activities and meetings that were held and asking for the state to make its position known. So one possible culprit could be the opposition, because this back and forth has been happening all the time amongst political parties, trying to tarnish each other's name by using the LGBTI community as a scapegoat, which is something that we see in many African countries. So that's one. But I think part of the strongest allies we have seen is the embassies themselves. And there was a heavy call from the public for them to apologize for raising the flags, and they asked us what it is we wanted them to do in response. And so we didn't think they should apologize. We didn't think they should take the statements back. We were actually very happy that they did that, because despite the negative side of it, it brought about conversation. And what this conversation is showing us is that in the last few years, the narrative has shifted to more neutral positive, whereas 5 years ago, all the conversation would be negative. Stories that are carried online would have 100% negative remarks. So now this is shifting a little bit more. You still have the homophobic comments and transphobic comments, but there's also a lot of neutral comments and positive comments. So there's the negative side of it, but also the positive. But I think the question of who is an ally is something that has really come out during this period, because we have realized that institutions that we thought of highly as allies previously, when push comes to shove, are the ones in the background that are telling us to tone it down, to keep quiet, to not go through with certain programs, and to just keep it on the low, which is very disappointing, I will say. Because if the allyship that they claim to have with us is only on paper and only in private settings, then I don't think that's useful allyship for us, because it's about people's lives. Whereas in these institutions, especially INGOs or the government overall health bodies, for them, it's about, do we continue to get global fund money for key population programs? It's about targets, it's about yield. Are we meeting what the donor wants? And forgetting that you're dealing with people's lives. So you can't keep quiet, and you can't just hide until it blows over, because how long is that going to happen? So it kind of makes us think a bit differently about who really are our allies, and are we really by ourselves in this kind of work that we're doing?
Okay. Thank you so much, Mino. I mean, you raise quite a number of issues that I think really important for this conversation, because we remember that sometime last year in Ghana, one of the things that really led to this big conversation and now this anti-homosexuality bill was an incident where when LGBT rights opened its offices, the foreign embassies went. And so it looks like people can do things like the other meetings that are referenced, but when the foreign embassies are involved, then many people start saying or building into this narrative that this is a foreign import, and then force government to do something about it. And so there is value in that allyship, but there is a way in which it also affects the public narrative, because then it fits into this neo kind of colonialism and imperialism, right? Because then it's easy to attribute whatever changes that are happening to it is easy to actually do that. So I think that's an important thing. I've just kind of interrupted myself with a message. I think the interpreter is here. I'm getting a message. Okay, fine. So we'll deal with that, but this is for the next speaker. The other point that I don't want us to lose is that there is a tension. And I think we need to be able to recognize this tension between people who are doing political advocacy and people who are doing public health interventions. And it's not because their allyship is necessarily suspect, it's because they've got different objectives. People who are working on HIV and AIDS programming have an objective, you know, whether they're getting funding from Global Fund or it's UNAIDS or whoever. Their objective is to make sure that there is access to treatment, you know, and that there is prevention work that is happening. And this work happens, you know, through collaborations with government. So they cannot afford, you know, to rock that boat. But there is a something that happens when people are not very clear. So sometimes I think we do like to pretend that we can kill two birds with one stone, you know, like we can do the public health programming and also do the political advocacy and human rights work. And somewhere in this relationship, there is something that gets compromised, you know, because the political advocacy messages is either muted or people are feeling they are being silenced, you know, by their partners. But is this a partnership that has got the same results or the goals? And I think maybe it's something we can come back to. But I think that's something that I took from your input around the issue of allyship.
I mean, absolutely. I don't know if you give me a minute because very weird day, but my battery might not survive. But just in case I drop off. You're very right around the political advocacy and the human rights kind of work that we do. So the one thing is the public health discourse has definitely helped with bringing visibility, which is a good thing, because before conversations weren't even happening. But when this health angle came in, conversations started happening, not only with the MSM, which was the focus around the public health kind of narrative, but it also opened up conversation around broader LGBTIQ. Good thing. However, in all of this happening, I think there has been, maybe it hasn't been thought of that there's implications to this funding, to this public health work, part of which is that visibility is bringing more awareness. And that awareness has not exactly been the awareness that needs to be there. People don't have the accurate and correct information, which then means they're just more aware, but not knowing what it is actually. And that's kind of also facilitating a little bit of the hate speech and the hate crimes. But when you also look at the funding, a lot of the funding is going towards the public health aspect of it, and not so much, if you compare the amount of money that's going towards advocacy for DCRIM and all that kind of thing, it's peanuts compared to money that's going just towards health service access. And people need to be healthy, great, but people also need to live in an environment that's conducive for that health to actually mean anything. So with this thing of the embassies being visible because they can, in whichever country they are, and part of it is they have asked what it is that we need them to do. Because a lot of the thing is they've been having these conversations on our behalf with government, with whoever it is that holds power, and that relationship has yielded some results. But part of what our ask here of them has been is use your access to facilitate or create spaces for us to share our own stories so that we get rid of this, it's a Western agenda, it's a European American thing. It has, you talking for us has definitely helped us in a way, but now that this conversation is kind of at a certain place, can you use your influence, can you use your access to give us those platforms and let us do the talking for ourselves? So that kind of conversation. Thank you so much for bringing that up.
Thank you, Mino. I am going to take us to Mozambique. Roberto, if you are able to hear me and speak, I need us to look at, I'm always messing this up, translation services, Simpiwe. Can someone say how people can still hear English when, or is it simultaneous translation? I think I've lost this.
Okay, thanks for responding. So it won't be simultaneous translation. We're having a bit of an issue with our settings, but like whenever Roberto just needs assistance from Irish, you know, he will speak and then Irish can come after him.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Simpiwe. All right, thank you, Roberto. Over to you. Roberto is going to speak. It's not simultaneous translation, but there is a translator who is going to translate what Roberto is saying. All right, over to you.
Bom dia a todas e a todos. Muito obrigado por esta oportunidade que nos dão para participar deste grande evento. Hello.
Hi, Iris, can you hear us?
To join this event, and good afternoon to everyone.
Yes,
Yes, I can hear you guys.
Hello.
Hi team, do you want me to? Hello, can you guys hear Mr. Hi team, can you guys hear Mr. Roberto? Alô,
Yes,
senhor
we can hear
Roberto, senhor Paulo.
Yes, sim, sim. Posso continuar?
Deixa eu perguntar à equipa, tá bem?
Ok.
Team, can we continue? Do you want Mr. Paulo to speak and then I translate?
Yes, please. Hi, Iris, you can proceed.
Yes. Can you guys, I can hear everyone clearly. I can hear everyone clearly. Mr. Paulo is waiting if he can proceed. He's asking if he can proceed.
Yes, you can. Yes, you may.
Sim, podes continuar, senhor Paulo.
Ok. Bom, obrigado. Moçambique, nós descriminalizamos a relação de duas pessoas do mesmo sexo em 2015. Mas antes disso, primeiro dizer que eu venho da Lambda. A Lambda é a Associação Moçambicana para a Defesa das Minorias Sexuais. Portanto, esta organização foi fundada em 2006. E como dizia, Moçambique...
Lambda was funded in 2006.
E como dizia, em 2015, Moçambique descriminalizou a relação de duas pessoas do mesmo sexo. Na altura, fez a revisão do nosso Código Penal e, nessa altura, nós tínhamos 2 artigos no Código Penal anterior que foram removidos.
So in 2015, there was still the discrimination part from the government side, but then they are still working on the process of removing that.
Can I try my English?
Yes, you may, Mr. Paulo, you may.
Yes, let me try my English. I can speak a bit, so I think I will proceed on English. Well, once again, good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting us.
Okay, Mr. Paulo, you can proceed.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting us to be part of this important initiative. Lambda is a Mozambican Association for Sexual Rights Defense. We were established in 2006. Well, as everyone knows, in 2015, Mozambique has decriminalized homosexuality when we were making a review of our old penal code. But it's important to also share that we have been asking for registration of our association in 2008. And from that until yesterday, we didn't receive any response from the Minister of Justice. Even with the decriminalization happened in 2015, we were expecting that our process of registration was going to be succeeded, but unfortunately, it happened. In 2016, we took the case to the administrative court because we realized that the government is violating the constitution, is violating other laws in country. And the process in administrative court took 5 years. The response came in August last year, and unfortunately, they didn't solve the problem. We were told that the way which we used to prepare the case was not the appropriate way. So it means that it was necessary 5 years to be told that you used it the wrong way. So at the moment, we are now preparing the advised way to submit again the case. So what we have seen, Mozambique is doing some progresses in some areas. For example, when we talk about HIV response. National AIDS Council approved last year our 5 strategic plan, and there explicitly said that intervention of HIV/AIDS must respect issues related with gender identity and sexual orientation. So what we see, it's mean that we are moving very well in terms of health provision. We have a very good relationship with the Minister of Health and the National AIDS Council. But for looking Lambda, we're LGBTIQ organizations. So our mandate is not only in HIV area. It's important, yes, but we are really is our mandate also promote LGBTI rights. And what we feel is that no one, in terms of funders and other strategic partners, are really making investment in terms of allowing us to promote LGBTI rights. Unfortunately, in country, we don't have services looking for example, lesbian and bisexual women. We don't have specific services, even when we talk about health issues. When we talk about, for instance, services for transgender community, we need hormonal therapy, we need to think about artificial insemination for reproduction. So those are services specific for transgender community, but when we come to the health sector, the main concern is only about HIV response. And it has been a big challenge for us making sure that we are really working in terms of promoting LGBTI rights. We don't face a lot of physical violation or physical abuse, but we have many cases of psychological violence, psychological abuse, which unfortunately mark everyone. It's once when you suffer this psychological violence, I'm not saying that the physical violence you don't suffer, but the psychological is more deeper, and is not, let's say, is not seen in terms of making sure that everyone is saying that, well, the country is tolerant, and there is acceptance, because people are not seeing physical violence. And we have discrimination in relationship with institutions. I was talking about the case of registration. We have been waiting at the Ministry of Justice since 2008. Recently, we have a case in which Minister of Education decided to remove a content related with the homosexuality. It was there within the last 18 years. So on grade 7, was able to learn about homosexuality, but the Minister of Education a few months ago came and decided to remove this content from the book. Sometimes as Lambda, for example, when we try to offer trainings for teachers and the police officers, unfortunately, we send letters for some institutions and they don't accept the invitation to receive the training. And the excuse used is this topic of homosexuality is very sensitive, so the society is not prepared. So I think that we have allies, as I was talking, in terms of people who meet the response, but we need to move beyond to making sure that we are really promoting LGBTI rights. We are really working in terms of advocacy. We are really making sure that the policies are really inclusive in terms of provision of services for everyone without discrimination. We have problems with religions, and we decided as Lambda since last year, we work with a group of pastors providing trainings for those pastors. We expect that in the future, they will help us in terms of spreading the message in some churches. The challenge now is to engage the Muslims, and we are thinking a good way to engage Muslims, because also we have a significant community of Muslims in the country. So we feel that this discrimination which we're facing with the institutions depends on the principles and the values of the decision makers. Because sometimes you can send the same letter, a same invitation for one institution and it accepted, and you send it the same letter, same invitation to another institution and they refuse it. It's depending who is in front, who is taking the decision. And we realize that we need to invest in those senior managers sensitizations. We need to start doing capacity building for national directors, vice ministers, some ministers. We need to think how to do it, but we need to reach those persons who have power to take decisions, because when a national director is involved, is sensitized, the chance to succeed in other level of the same institutions becomes higher. For now, I would like to stop here. Thank you. I hope that you could follow my point.
Very, very, very well, Roberto. Thank you very much. We were able to follow. The removal of information, sexuality-based information from the curriculum. Do you know how the Department of Education came to make this decision? Like, what is behind this move?
Well, it was very interesting. It was very interesting how it happened, because someone posted on Facebook a picture of the page of the content, put it in the Facebook, and started saying, "Look, what our schools are teaching our kids," and it was started as a very small comment on Facebook, and in the following day, there were other 4 people also commenting the issue on Facebook, and those are influencers, are people who have a lot of people following them. And after 2 or 3 days, we have that issue being discussed in some television channels. So after that, in the following week, the Minister of Education organized a press conference where they announced that they were going to remove the content. We know that the process of elaborating curriculum, it takes a very, very long time. It's necessary to make a auscultation process, researches, to put topics on the curricula. But in less than 2 weeks, the debate started and decision was made, and the Minister of Education came to announce the decision. It makes us feel that the person who posted the issue on Facebook, it was not unplanned. It was something organized, because the following event, until the Minister of Education make the announcement, it looks that it was something was very well planned and very well organized, that this will be the first stage, this will be the second stage, this will be the third stage. So we did a pressure in terms of advocacy. We've been talking with some of our allies, and the same Minister of Education came after 2 weeks, and that there were a misunderstanding. They're going to remove the content from 7, and it's coming on grade 6. So we are following, because it seems very confused. We really don't know. They promised to put on grade 6. We don't know what are they going to put, what will be the content. So we are following to see really what is going to happen. But it's show us that unfortunately we have those movements well organized in terms of making sure that the progress which are we doing, they are not going faster. So it's not, it seems that it's not something occasional. They know what they're doing. So we need, let's say, open all eyes and the ears and follow what's going on and see, be well prepared. Unfortunately, as I was saying, the most available resources in some countries is for HIV response. And when we want to develop advocacy campaigning, there's no resources to finance this kind of intervention. So it's something which we need to think seriously. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. It's normally very hard to have a conversation when you have got 6 panelists. Our webinar is supposed to end in 12 minutes. So there is an objective to this. We are just not here because it's a talk shop.
Hi everyone, can you guys hear us?
I can hear you, Cynthia.
Oh, okay. I think perhaps we lost everyone in there for a bit. Maybe while we are waiting for her to come back, I think I'll just ask that. I saw you raise your hand, so I can ask you to come in while we wait for
For that. It is important. So I was just bringing the context for this conversation so that when we close, at the very least, we give SHRDN what it is that they need from us. They work to defend Human Rights Defenders Network, and today's conversation, it's a beginning of a conversation about what are the threats that various activists are facing in the sub-region. And there is another conversation that's supposed to happen later in the year, at a Southern African Human Rights Defenders Network. So what we were trying to get here is to begin a conversation that really is about building solidarity, because when we have informed ourselves, then there is a very clear way of knowing what are the mechanisms that can be put in place in order to respond to the various challenges that people are facing. I'm saying this so that George is leaving now. Okay, George, we can continue the conversation. You did say you were in transit, so you are catching a flight. Bye-bye. Perhaps from this, there can be a follow-up to the conversation. So what I want us to think about, having heard what other people have to say, it's what are the mechanisms that you think need to be put in place in order to respond to the threats or attacks that human rights defenders are facing in the region. from the top of my head, from the things that I heard, just starting where we ended with George, this links to the conversation or the point that we got from Zambia. There are people, they are organizing, and the tactics are similar. They are very well organized. They do use social media to do the attacks. What happened in Mozambique is an attack against comprehensive sexuality education. It's a very well-known attack of anti-rights actors. It's been used in Latin America, in Eastern Europe, and we've seen the same thing in South Africa when the Department of Basic Education was pushed, and they tried to say, because the conversation is about, look at what they are doing to our children. They are teaching them age inappropriate content. So you need to remove this from the curriculum. But what it is about, it's about distorting the thing that is in the textbook to begin with, because when you think about it, this that we are hearing from Beto has been in the school book for 18 years. But a person starts on social media and other influential people, and then it escalates within a matter of days. It's on national TV, which is not different from what we had from Mino as having happened in Zambia. So there is a knowledge or a research gap, because we have to understand who are these people and how is it, because their strategy is the same: get the president to speak, get the minister to act. So there is something there that we can talk about when we talk about this attacks, that this is where the information is actually coming from, and this is how it is filtering. So we need to understand how people act in the various countries. There has been this conversation that came from a number of people around religious actors, and sometimes I think we talked a bit about traditional leaders or the role of culture. And I think this is something that we also need to be able to think about, like, how do we work with the religious leaders? And so there's one thing around inclusive faith, and other people talk about good religion and bad religion when religion is used. So for example, in Zambia, we heard about how first you had a doctor who framed the issue as mental health issue, but then you had a pastor and a reverend speaking. So how do you engage with the churches or the religious leaders that are doing harm vis-a-vis the ones that are actually working in collaboration with the communities? And then from also some of the interventions that we had, so we saw the tactics of the anti-rights actors that we need to understand. We're looking at the issue of religion. We had a bit of a conversation from Zimbabwe and also from Zambia and Malawi to a certain extent around the insider-outsider. We do know that when the context is not very hostile, people are able to work with government on some issues. But what is the meaning of this? Is this a space that can be exploited or used to the advantage of the community when there is an in and people are able to work? And I think Katle really helped us to understand that how the bureaucracy inside can really work to reverse or stall some of the progress that's been made elsewhere. So we are seeing the courts taking a very progressive step, but we are actually seeing that government is not doing that. So I am going to give you the 6 minutes to actually, so that means you all have like 1 minute each to just tell us like one little thing. What are the things that you think needs to be put in place in order to protect civic space for human rights defenders working on LGBTQI in the core, in the sub-region? Let's go. Let's start with you, Katlego. Your hand was up.
Hi, yeah, so I think I missed the tail end of your question. So could you just like give it to me? I know I've got a minute. Okay. What mechanisms do you think should be put in place to protect civic space and human rights defenders in particular in the sub-region? What? I think in Botswana, the reason I had my hand up earlier was the fact that I was just recently approached by the curriculum development department in basic education to say, oh, by the way, we're going to do a national rollout of our new CSE and our new CSE curriculum. So we are looking for inputs from LGBTQ plus folks to ensure that we are doing it right. So again, it's that thing of we've got the the silent allies, and then it's, oh, but you're in the system, but nobody knows how we got there. So I think the mechanisms that are ideal for protecting human rights defenders, especially in Botswana, we need more spaces of respite. We need spaces for like retreating and being able to step away from the work, because very often the work is our lives. And then our lives end up, our life quality deteriorates because we are 24 hours on the job. So we do need to have moments and to build this culture of take a break. I think that is one of the most important things for me.
Thank you, Katlego. Chester?
Thank you, Sibongile. I think for us as activists, we need to start working deeper and harder in terms of our advocacy efforts to try and counter the dangerous beliefs and attitudes that currently exist that impact on our work. We also need to strengthen our work with allies. We can't go it alone. We really definitely need allies so that we are able to work smarter in terms of the work that we do, and also work on ourselves as a community, as LGBTI activists, because also some of the challenges emanate from our own community, and we really need to also work on ourselves. Thank you.
Fantastic. Sisanda? Sisanda Mavimbela, Eswatini, you're on mute. All right, let's move to Roberto. Can you get hold of this?
Well, thank you. I think that for us and LGBTI defenders, we need how can I say it? We need to learn more about safety and security, because sometimes we put our own lives at risk, and maybe we don't know how some techniques, how to avoid risks area, how do we manage our mobile phones and computers. So we are at the risk to be, let's say, people entering our computer to remove our information, listen to our conversation. So we need to learn more in terms of safety and security. And I would like if you could influence at the SADC level, the issues of comprehensive sexual education. If you can push it at SADC level, we can make sure that every single country must work in terms of making sure that it's happening in countries. So we can use the comprehensive sexual education as an entry point to start talking openly about gender identity and this sexual orientation.
Okay. Thank you all very much. We have lost Mino. We have lost also George. So one of my things is being a time person. I respect people's time. We told you we're going to keep you here until 12:30. So mine is over. It's just to thank you. And
Sisanda here.
Okay, Sisanda, you've got a few seconds before 12:30.
Sorry, Sibongile, I couldn't unmute. So mine is just to say, as human rights defenders of the LGBTI community within the SADC region, let's learn from each other. I think within this conversation, we've learned that Botswana has an actual opposite to Swaziland, where the policies are there, but the progress on the ground, and then we feel like the progress on the ground is happening, where yet we want the policies to meet us halfway. It's just a matter of us as human rights defenders, while we have the relaxing spaces where Kat said we need, let us then talk about how we can help each other with what we are each doing and how we are doing it as human rights defenders, and what's working and what's not for each other. Because unfortunately, we have human rights defenders within our countries, but not doing LGBTI work, so we can reference better within other LGBTI human rights defenders.
Thank you all very much. Let the record reflect that at 12:30 we were done. Simpiwe, over to you.
Thank you, Sibongile.
Thank you so much, Sibongile, and thanks a lot as well to all the panelists. My apologies for the noise. Right now, I'm just working from a public place due to load shedding. So I think, as Sibongile had said, for now we'll just end the conversation here. It's certainly not the end, because I think as a network we're still very much love to be proactive when it comes to protecting LGBTIQ defenders. So we'll keep in touch with everyone. And yeah, this is just to say thanks a lot again for joining. So goodbye.
Okay, thank you all very much, and thank you very much to all the people who stayed with us until the end. Have a wonderful day further. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Swangile.
Bye-bye.